There were a few machinations right there to open up the telecast.
Okay.
Hello and welcome to episode 305 of Hot Media. I'm Bob Mann, and when I asked my good friend Rem Ryder to come on the program to just do a journalism update, I did not expect that we would have the embarrassment of riches that we have right now. But we're going to be talking about the Reuters investigation of AT&T's alleged funding of the very radical One American News Network. In addition to that, we will be talking about two crusading journalists who risked their lives and their freedom, but they've won the Nobel Peace Prize as a result, and many other topics in journalism in our journalism update. And Rem Ryder, who you see right there on our video version, is the former editor of the American Journalism Review, former editor at large for USA Today, and media columnist also for that newspaper. And right now is adjunct professor of journalism at Widener College in Pennsylvania. Is it Widener College or University?
University.
University. I do not want to reduce it in status. Widener University. And thank you very much, Rem, for coming here on the program. You have always been, going back to the satellite radio days, a tremendous source of information and analysis for us right here.
Well, thank you so much, Bob. It's always a pleasure talking to you, as you know.
Let's begin with it. We normally publish on Fridays. We're publishing on Monday here today, and I'm glad we had that slight delay because John Oliver was on last night on HBO, which still is owned by AT&T, and jumped upon something which has, I talk about us covering the hottest media controversies here. Well, this was a very hot media controversy, still is. The Reuters investigation about AT&T funding a very radical disseminator of misinformation and conspiracy theory. So if you can give us some of the details on that.
Yeah, the network involved is called OAN, a cable network, which got not heavily watched, but got a lot of attention during the Trump administration because Donald Trump was a huge fan. And this is an outfit that makes Fox News look like a liberal network. It's conservative doesn't really cover it. It's very much traffics in conspiracy theories of the kind on the QAnon site, pretty far out stuff. And what Reuters revealed recently is that pretty much all of its funding comes from AT&T through fees to put it on its various operations. And also AT&T had a role in suggesting its formation. And it's one thing to have a diversity of voices. I think we're all for that. And you wouldn't only want liberal media or conservative media. But this is a pretty far out outfit that, as I said, traffics in conspiracy. And it's kind of disconcerting to find that it owes its entire existence to the huge telecom AT&T through its fees. And it seems like a very odd thing to be underwriting to me.
Yeah, this is not just another voice. And as you pointed out, it would be one thing for it to be carried. You can carry a wide range of voices, and really, you're simply just providing a carrier service through a cable company or through a streaming service or whatever. But this is advocating what they're saying and what they're doing. And one of the things that John Oliver showed last night, I watch his show every week anyway. I wasn't just watching it in connection with this particular story. But of course, he jumped right out at it. And AT&T said, well, we like to carry a diversity of voices and give them editorial freedom. And he goes, all right, well, I'll take advantage of that editorial freedom right now to say that corporate daddy, you're a bad company. But he also had a clip in which there was a commentator calling for anyone who was involved in, and they did not say the alleged stealing of the 2020 election, but just outright stealing of the 2020 election, should be tried for treason. And we know that the penalty for that is death. So this is fairly common for the type of things that OAN carries, right? This is not Fox News.
No, it's not. It's far different. As I say, trafficking in conspiracy theories, and not really something that adds to public dialogue at all. In fact, it very much detracts from it. And again, if people want to watch it, I guess that's fine. But the idea that it's being wholly underwritten by a telecom, which ironically is the same one that owns CNN. Again, diversity of voices is great, but to again, not just paving the way, but really creating and making possible the existence of such a noxious enterprise just doesn't make any sense to me.
And when you consider the dangers of January 6th and people not getting vaccinated and all of that, this is not just a political point of view, and this goes well beyond the use of the word conservative. Now, Reuters came out with this very recently. I'm just citing John Oliver. He's citing the investigative journalism done by Reuters, which I think said they court documents, sworn deposition or testimony said that AT&T is funding up to 90% of OAN.
That's right.
How does a company get out from under that if indeed they do? Do they stop the practice? Because then obviously those who adhere to the OAN point of view will simply come down on AT&T in the other direction.
Yeah, or do they want to stop the practice? There's no evidence that they do. That's what OAN does has been pretty clear for quite some time. I remember in the last year, as you remember, Bob, I spent working as an editor-at-large for factcheck.org. And I remember checking out some bogus conspiracy theory that OAN was floating, and it was appalling as you got into it. There was just no underpinning for it, no basis for it. So this is pretty low. It's low level. Doesn't rise to the level of journalism at all. It's pretty scary stuff. And one thing we've learned, you were talking about January 6th and the insurrection, and about the problems of anti-vaccination misinformation. What we've learned that these are not abstract or theoretical things. They're really real world dangers to a lot of the nonsense that's being spouted.
Let's talk about some good news. 2 journalists win the Nobel Peace Prize. This is unbelievable. And, during the course of the summer, when we first started to move into doing video, in addition to the audio podcast, I had on an NYU history professor, Ruth Ben-Gayat, who has written a book about dictatorships, and that the very first thing any dictator ever does is to discredit and cripple the news media. And that seems to be what's happening in these 2 countries, and these 2 very courageous journalists have been recognized as providing the main underpinning for a democracy, which is journalism. Talk a little bit about this great news about these 2 journalists and this most prestigious prize.
It is, to me, it's fantastic news, because you have, as you say, very courageous journalists, one from the Philippines, one from Russia, both countries with authoritarian regimes that are very rough on the press. And the Nobel really was awarded both to these 2 terrific journalists, but also as a kind of symbol of support for journalism writ large, journalism, and particularly in countries, and there are many, where journalists are under siege. The Russian paper, Novaya Gazeta here, has had 6 of its staffers killed over the years. I remember when I was at AJR, American Journalism Review, we ran a big story on the death of one of them maybe 15 years ago. And similarly, in the Philippines, you have a strong man there who has been very tough on the Rappler, the publication, the online publication, whose founder was honored in this case. So it's a great sign, I think, and a great show of support by the Nobel people for what we think is a really important component of a democracy, and important for life anywhere, particularly in these in authoritarian countries, and that's a free press that holds government accountable and institutions accountable. This, I think, is a very exciting development, and I think it shows strength to help these institutions, these two particular institutions. But I think also, it's a ringing endorsement of journalism uh, wherever it's under siege.
And what's really great is that it is recognized that the very first step, the first pillar, really is journalism, is honest reporting. And now around the rest of the world, it seems that there has been an echo chamber for what unfortunately came out of our country, the use of the word fake news. Dictators just love to immediately say, when they're being called for any kind of corruption, well, yeah, fake news.
Right. I mean, and then we've seen already damage to the free press in this country from former President Trump's relentless attacks on the media, calling journalists enemies of the people, as you say, referring to stories he doesn't like as fake news. And the result has been that a big chunk of the country, Trump's base, just doesn't really have confidence or believe in much of the news media. And it's important to remember that media is used too often as a collective term, as if it was a monolith. Media comes in a lot of flavors, but the attacks on the traditional reporting based media that were so critical of former President Trump has really taken a toll. And Trump was very upfront about why he did this. You'll remember in an interview at 60 Minutes, where he said, "The reason I do this is when there's stories critical of me, I don't want my people to believe them." And so he's had a great deal of success with this assault, and it also undercuts that has also undercut journalism around the world, because for years the United States was seen as a beacon of freedom, of democracy, of freedom of the press. And when we have the president of the United States for 4 years, as we did, repeatedly demonizing the media and basically saying it shouldn't be taken seriously, that has ripples all over the world.
It really is, especially when it does indeed come from here with our First Amendment and our Constitution. Let me just read this verbatim because it's really encouraging. The Nobel Committee has decided to award the Nobel Peace Prize for 2021 to Maria Ressa and Dmitry Muratov for their efforts to safeguard freedom of expression, which is a precondition for democracy and lasting peace. I think that the committee summed it up perfectly right there. The basis for democracy and lasting peace.
They really did, and it's something, it's easy. It's too easy for us to take for granted until you see the implications of the freedom of the press being under attack. Telling truth to power is an important thing, and it's important to remember that this really shouldn't be a partisan issue. I mean, the way journalism should work, and frankly often does work, is to be critical based not on ideology, not on whether you like a candidate, but on where the facts take you. And we saw a great indication of this. One of my students at Widener said to me that he was really surprised to see that CNN was so rough on President Biden over the messiness of the exit from Afghanistan, because I guess he assumed because CNN had been so critical of Trump and there was plenty to criticize, he kind of was assuming that CNN was in the pockets of the Democrats. And he was really pleased to see that wasn't surprised, but really pleased to see that wasn't the case. That when a Democrat,
it shouldn't surprise people, though. It should not surprise people.
It shouldn't. But that I think that's sort of the success of where Trump has polarized people so much on the media that there are a lot of people, and this isn't just Trump. For years, as you know, the right has attacked the liberal media, which isn't so liberal. A and B. For the most part, is going to really follow the facts where they lead. Going back quite a few years, you remember the constant drumbeat of criticism of President Clinton during the Clinton-Lewinsky scandal. The fact that there was a survey at the time that got a lot of attention saying that something like 80% of Washington journalists were Democrats. Well, that sure didn't affect them when it came to covering the Clinton-Lewinsky story. What their ideology was what's the story? And this was a important and a juicy story, and the press was all over it, regardless of whether they were Democrats or Republicans. And certainly, as you say, people should not have been surprised that CNN was so tough on Biden if that's where the facts led them.
We don't have that much time and a lot of ground to cover. You made a very good point that media is not a monolithic thing. As a matter of fact, it is inherently a plural word. It's medium, and there are media.
Right.
And certainly one medium, which could not be considered at all liberal, is Fox News. But Fox News is now celebrating its 25th anniversary. So when you think about that, the first presidential race they would have had to deal with was Clinton Dole. That seems so mild in retrospect in terms of the differences that would have been between those two candidates. But you'd have to say that love them or hate them, Fox News has changed the entire political structure of the United States.
It really has. I mean, it's been an enormous success financially, obviously, an enormous success with the ratings, by far the most watched cable news network. And as you say, an important political player. I mean, you have a network that really skews not in a lot of its program to conservative and will ignore stories that are clearly major news stories because they're uncomfortable with them politically. But there are a lot of people who all they watch is Fox, and so this has been an enormous achievement of the late Roger Ailes, who created it, and Rupert Murdoch, who owns it. I mean, they saw quite accurately that there was a huge appetite for this. There were a lot of people who wanted news with a conservative flavor, and they sure have gotten it.
And of course, when you compare them to OAN, Fox News is much more responsible in terms of what it has done. It upset Donald Trump tremendously when they declared Arizona for Joe Biden on Fox News. He said that they had basically betrayed him, but he certainly did benefit from their political point of view more than almost any other Republican ever did. Donald Trump depended heavily on Fox News during his campaign, his presidency, and even after it.
That's very true. I mean, there's no doubt. You can talk about the two different aspects of Fox News. There are some programs that are kind of news programs, and their primetime lineup is pretty much all opinion, with the Tucker Carlsons of the world. And I think you could argue a lot of damage has been done by, for example, a lot of that anti-vaccine coverage on Fox. But even with the news programs too, there are a lot of uncomfortable issues uncomfortable with Trump that were ignored. And just last week, Stephanie Grisham, who was one of President Trump's press secretaries, who's out with a book that's brutally critical of the former president, she said that whenever she wanted to get a message out, that would not be questioned at all, that there'd be no rebuttal, nothing, that it would be accepted completely. She went to Fox, knowing she would get no critical questioning at all. And she was asked, well, would you say it's sort of like state TV, the kind of state-owned media that you have in places like Russia and China? And she said,
old Pravda.
Exactly right. And Grisham said yes. She said OAN even more so. But Fox was her go-to, knowing that she could say anything she wanted, get any message out, and it would be accepted as gospel, totally uncritically.
We mainly on this program cover mass media, but we before we go off, we can't ignore the Facebook whistleblower. Of course, Facebook has been trying to say that this was not a senior executive, not a policymaker, not someone who was there for a very long time, which may be true. But what impact, if any, does this have? The idea that there was an internal whistleblower at Facebook and the possibilities that they could be ignoring what they're putting out there in the interest of profit.
I think it can have a really big impact. And some of those questions of how long she was there, how high level she was, really are beside the point. A lot of her impact that she's already had is with documents she has leaked, internal documents. When she left her job, she copied a lot of these documents and gave a lot of them to the Wall Street Journal, which ran a very tough series of articles on Facebook before the whistleblower decided to make public her identity and to go before Congress. And the thrust of her message is that Facebook, despite some of its rhetoric that it really is worried about misinformation, doesn't really care much about misinformation. What it really cares about is to get the audience as big as possible and make as much money as possible. And to that extent, will continue to allow the posting of a lot of misinformation, because that's what fires people up, gets them engaged, gets big audiences. And essentially, that was her message. And it's a very tough message. And again, it's based on documents. It's not just on her opinion. And so it doesn't, these are kind of red herrings that Facebook's thrown up there about what her rank was or how long she was there. She's got the receipts, as they say. And I think, there isn't much that's bipartisan in Washington these days, but I think there is bipartisan concern about Facebook, its enormous clout and impact, and its enormous role in spreading misinformation.
Well, Rem, I thank you very much for being a regular here on the podcast, and before this on the satellite radio program. You're always on top of everything that is happening in the field of journalism, and there's a lot happening this past week, so this was a pretty good week to have you on.
Perfect. As usual, your timing was brilliant.
Right. It's all me. It's all me.
It's all about you. But it's always a delight to talk to you, so thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you very much. One of our favorite guests and one of our longest running guests. That's Rem Ryder. For those of you who are listening to the audio version of this podcast, please note that we are still on Spotify, Apple Podcast, Odyssey, all of those audio platforms. And we are adding video here with YouTube on the Bob Mann channel. So please go and subscribe, audio and video, as we talk about the most important issues in mass media, both journalism and entertainment. And for much more information about this podcast, please go to our website, www.bobmanhotmedia.com. And in addition to that, please follow me on Twitter, my handle @BobManMedia. And please join us on a regular basis every week as we discuss the nation's most important and interesting media issues right here on Hot Media.